It's 4 p.m. We're bringing you developing news and the stories behind the headlines. This is Story Conference. I'm Ed Lingao. Some stories are watching this Thursday, August 20. Vice President Sara accused Senator Hontiveros of politicizing the OVP budget hearing. This after Hontiveros questioned the office's Pagbabago campaign and scrutinized a 10 million peso allocation for the children's book that Duterte authored. But the senator insisted her questions were simple and straightforward. She also pointed out the lack of courtesy from Duterte, noting that resource persons typically respect both the legislative and the executive. And the Philippines has granted the U.S. request to temporarily host Afghans. That's as the resettlement in the U.S. is being processed. Manila and Washington said only a limited number of visa applications will be covered by the program. And joining us today, Ami Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star, and Storycon's resident political pundit, Tito Ronald Llamas.
Happy Tuesday!
Good afternoon, Ed, Ronald.
Ami,
Happy Tuesday.
Ed,
Happy Tuesday.
pink na pink ka, Ami.
Oo nga eh. Parang may konting kulay. Wala na yung bag, umalis na.
Baka magalit sa'yo si Vice President.
Wala na sa Metro Manila. Wala na sa Metro Manila.
Ikaw talaga.
Baka magalit sa'yo si BP Sara niya.
Wala akong kinalaman sa sinabi niya.
Nasubaybay mo ba yung hearing ngayon? Ganda.
Quite an interesting hearing, ha?
Yes. Pero expected naman yan kay VP. Hindi naman yan umuurong sa ganyang mga well, ang tawag na ng mga tao, medyo nagbangayan na, no?
Saka maraming duwalo.
Tingnan natin kung ano ending kung ano ending niyang kung anong mangyayari. In fact, dun sa sa budget ng Office of the Vice President kasi mas mabait actually ang mga senador kaysa sa House of Representatives, no? At nangangako na nga yung ibang congressman na careful scrutiny daw ng budget ng OVP for 2025. Kasi nagreklamo nga si VP Sara, di ba, na yung daw budget natin kaya one of the reasons she resigned from the cabinet mismanaged daw yung budget. Kaya nag-react yung ibang mga, of course, yung mga lawmakers, they have the power of the purse. Yan, tinitingnan natin ngayon yan kung ano magiging impact sa budget for 2025.
Dami rin senador na dumalo sa hearing.
Dahil nandun nga
Mga
siya.
marites, eh. Ang daming marites.
Saka I think they were all expecting na baka nga magkaroon ng konting magkainitan ng konti, ano?
But it was interesting to watch how these two personalities play.
Hindi ko napanood Tinignan ko lang yung mga summary ng mga istorya.
It's also kind of revealing yung how one responds to the other. For example, how the VP responds to questions propounded by Senator Hontiveros. For example, in many of the questions being asked by Senator Hontiveros, ang sagot prati ni VP is the senator is politicizing the budget hearing. Yun prati yung, at least in two of the questions, I think she only asked two questions.
sabi nga ni Vice President Sara, bakit pinopoliticize ito? Dahil ba yung pangalan ko nandun sa libro?
Because she authored, apparently, a book that binadgetan ng 10 million to be distributed among school children. And si Riza Hontiveros was asking, ano yung laman ng libro? Tungkol saan yun? At ang sagot ni VP Sara, why is the senator politicizing this budget hearing? Ganun agad.
Hindi, yung libro mismo. Bakit pinopoliticize? Dahil nandun yung pangalan niya sa libro.
But that's a legitimate question, di ba? Remember nung panahon ni...
That's why I'm saying na parang it's interesting to watch the dynamics and how, for example, the VP responds to questions that at least on the surface are actually valid questions.
Yes.
That could be or should be
especially
asked.
when it concerns public funds.
You also...
Kasi remember nung panahon ni GMA, nagkaroon din ng ganyang issue Yun naman mga health packs, di ba? Health kits naman na may mga pangalan din ng mga government officials. Matagal, alam ko meron ng prohibition sa mga ganyan.
Alam ko rin.
Even if it's not a campaign issue.
Alam ko rin.
Even if, di ba? Kahit hindi ka nangangampanya, you're not supposed to put your name on items na procure using public funds. Yan din ang pagkaalam ko.
Kung hindi, gagawa rin ako ng libro. Lalagay ko yung pangalan ko. No?
Tito Ronald, the International Man of Mystery. Di ba? Ano sa title, di ba? Austin Powers.
Dadami yun. Sigurado ko, ang dami magsusulat ng libro nila, tapos lalagay nila yung pangalan nila, di ba?
Oo nga, at gastos natin lahat.
Oo.
Yan, okay lang kung out of pocket nila eh. Pero kung public funds yung ginagamit, yun ang problema.
But
Yun ang politicalization.
You can't dismiss a question just because you don't want to answer it. You can't dismiss it simply as a politicking.
Yeah. Baka ibig sabihin, syempre, yung lahat siyang politiko, pwede mo sabihin yung politicize. Yung nagtatanong politician. Kaya alam, mahirap yan. So, tatanungin natin, titignan natin kung anong magiging takbo ng mga katanungan pagdating sa House. Kasi medyo, yun. Sila, remember, this year, natanggalan na ng 650 million. 500 million ng OVP and another 150 million sa Department of Education in secret confidential funds.
Confidential and intelligence funds. No? At mukhang nasa Supreme Court pa yung kaso na yun. No? May nagsampa.
Yan na nga. Dahil galing may involvement yung Office of the President dun sa approval process, di ba? Kaya kine-question pa yun kasi baka maulit nga.
Tapos,
I think...
Tapos sa amin, naulit-uli yung kanyang reklamo kay Marbil, Chief PNP Marbil, na bakit pinalitan yung kanyang mga pulis na malapit na sa kanya. May tiwala na siya. 2007 at 2010 pa. Alam ko, may rules talaga dyan eh. Dahil it will breed familiarity.
Hindi na bawal yun, ano?
It will breed.
Alam ko rin bawal yun eh.
Alam ko, bawal yun eh. Nagulat lang ako na inulit niya.
Anyway, may sagot dyan ng PNP, di ba? Sinabi ng PNP, naghihintay daw sila ng formal request para ibalik yung 35, I think about 35. Yung out of the 75, mga 35 yung mga matatagal na sa kanila.
Pero the two of you raise an interesting point na bawal siya. Do you recall kung ano yung, is it a law? Is it under the police
I think it's an election regulation na kailangan kang mag-reshuffle ng mga police officers every election. Nakakailang election na since 2007.
Dahil it will breed familiarity.
Yeah, I understand.
At saka yan ay hindi private security. These are sinasahuran ng gobyerno. Kaya may internal rules talaga dyan. No?
Saka nagiging private army sila, yun nga ang iniiwasan, di ba? Remember yung Maguindanao massacre? That was an election mass murder, election-related.
Yes.
At ang ginamit doon yung private army ng mga ampatuan. And among the members of that private army
mga police.
were regular police officers. Di ba?
Yes.
Kaya nga precisely yun yung iniiwasan eh. Dahil hindi lang naman yung mga ampatuan ang gumagawa noon. Although not on that scale. Talagang marami tayong mga local, pati nga si Alice Go eh. Hindi ba? Sabi nila. Meron mga inaakusahan na pinoproteksyonan daw yung mayor. Eh, siyempre, merong contingent na security yung mayor's office ng Bamban. I guess, yun yung ano. Kaya lang iniimbestigahan din niya kung pinoproteksyonan daw yung pogo nga na nasa Bamban.
Eh, buti nga kung public officials lang yung ginagano eh. Pero you also see a lot of parang ano yun, negosyante ba? Ba't may police escort?
Mga kaibigan ng mga politician who are entitled to, well, not entitled, pero meron silang jurisdiction, some form of jurisdiction over the local police. I guess nakaka-request through them. I doubt kung dadampay sa pangkamin, dami-dami niyan eh. Hindi yung kilala niyang mga nandyan sa krame. Unless na-assign sila sa lugar na yon. Kaya okay ang sinusuportahan natin yung ginagawa ngayon ni General Marbil na nag-uumpisa ng mag-withdraw. I don't think he can do it completely and in one sweep. Pero pinag-aaralan daw nila kung sino nga yung pwedeng tanggalan.
At saka yung isang tanong kanina, Ami, ay ilan na ba ang natirang security nyo? Nung una, ayaw sagutin. Dahil kwan daw ay confidential daw yon at saka security issue. Eventually ay sinagot din 397. So 400.
Ito, remaining to?
Oh,
o
yung remaining.
After mabawasan?
397. That's even more than what we thought. Akala natin mga 330 na lang natitira, di ba?
Kasi yung base
397.
figure natin was from 2022, from the COA report of 2022, we didn't have the latest. Baka dumagdag pa ng latest.
Nadagdagan pala, nadagdagan. Nakukulangan pa. Kailan ba tayo magkaka-bodyguard head? Kahit tigisa lang pwede na. Kailan mahirap pa kainin yan.
Hindi kaya ng 64 pesos mo yun. Ami, hindi kaya ng 64 pesos mo yun.
Kailangan silang mabuhay dun sa 21 per meal. Yung sabi ko, pagluluto ko sila ng malunggay araw-araw sa kamunggo.
Wewelgahan ka nun pag pinakain mo ng 21 peso per meal.
Malunggay sa kamunggo.
Alam mo, sa bisyo pa lang hindi na pwede yan.
Sardinas.
Mga pulis pa naman, di ba?
Magkano ba kaya sa loto?
Omelette araw-araw.
Gulo, tanong kaya kami.
Hindi, pinag-aaralan daw ng DSWD yan, yung food threshold, kung paano pag-compute. Ang problema nila, basing ito nutrition nutrition Kung nutrition actually, manguha ka lang ng malunggay sa kapitbahay. Napakataas ng nutrition value ng malunggay. Kasi yan ang problema siguro, kailangang i-finesse nila yung definition nung kung nutritional needs lang, munggo nga, malunggay, kalabasa, talagang highly nutritious yan. Pero, syempre, sasabihin ng mga tao, papakainin mo kami ng malunggay araw-araw.
Pero I was listening to an interview with the PSA, with another radio station, and they were defending the 64 peso.
Hindi, sinabi ko na nga sa'yo, kahit ako kaya ko, kung magluluto ako Pero kung bibili ko sa nagtitinda ng ulam, kasi ngayon kahit sa mga tulak-tulak, yung ulam mo baka mga pinakamababa na doon, mga 25 to 30 ulam para pa yung kanin. Siyempre, kailangan mo ng inumin. Siyempre, kailangan mo ng kape or something. Siguro, ganun ang kinocompute. Depende ko ano yung computation. I think they have to clarify.
Kahit kasi 1 kilo ng malunggay, hindi kakayanin ng 64 pesos
Mura lang malunggay.
So, unless mangungupit ka sa kapitbahay mo.
Sobrang bigat ng 1 kilong malunggay.
Oo, 1 kilo bigat.
Siyempre, kailangan mo rin ng bigas. Kakain ka rin ng kanin
Bigas. Hindi, kung family of 6, I don't think they can finish 1 kilo of rice in one day. 42 yun.
But what I'm saying is, ang sabi doon sa interview, yung 64 pesos a day, which is mga $1.16, hindi raw nalalayo sa international standard.
Hindi Malayo yun. Alam ko,
Hindi raw nalalayo sa international standard na nasa $2.20. Parang, teka, doble yun Sumalayo.
Kaya international standard, halo-halo na yan, kasa. Ano lang, in average lang yan, from the richest to the
What I'm saying is,
poorest.
hindi rin nalayo sa international standard, but when they cited the numbers, doble. So medyo malayo.
Tsaka hindi ko alam kung anong international standard yung sinasabi nila. Ano yun? Sa Somalia? Sa Darfur? Saan ba yun?
Sa Sudan, gano'n.
Saan ba yung international standard na yun? Na $2?
Kailangan i-clarify nga nila yung mga pinagbabasihan. Kasi remember, yung mga ganyang bagay, yan din ang pinagbabasahan ng mga wages
Oo. Tsaka bibili ka pa ng sahog Bibili ka ng mantika, patis, bawang, mga pansahog.
Ang mahal doon yung bawang.
Minsan mahal pa yung pansahog
Mahal yung bawang.
Teka, Ami, yung tao ninyo sa Senado, si Cecil, Suerte Felipe, is on the line. Ipasok natin bago maputol.
Sige, mag-chismis tayo.
Cecil, anong chismis dyan? Mukhang nagkainitan kanina.
Oo nga Hi, Cecil.
Hi, Cecil.
Baka nag-aaway pa rin hanggang ngayon.
Hello. Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir.
Go.
Ronald. Opo, good afternoon.
Go, pakwento. Mainit o kanina, mainit.
Ayun po. Kasi Di ba today, diniscuss ng Committee on Finance yung budget ng Vice President na may request na to 2.37 billion. During the proceeding, tinanong ni Senator Hontiveros yung 10 million allocation for a book which was written by the Vice President. So tinanong ni Senator Risa, can you tell me about the book? Tapos sinagot ni Vice President na, ganyan yung pamumulitika. So humaba na yung sagot niya. At during the course ng exchange nila, pati yung paghingi ng tulong ni Senator Risa during the election ng pang-third yatang binanggit na ni VP Sara. So parang ganon. Buti nag-prevail yung pagiging calm. Kilala niyo po si Senator Grace na sobrang calm. Siya yung chairperson ng Committee on Finance. So sabi niya, sige, ganito na lang. Ano na lang in general yung laman ng book. Only to be told na, di ba, yung title ay sabi niya, yung isang kaibigan, parang ganun po. Ang pinupoint ni VP Sara ay parang ini-insinuate niya na baka pang-campaign sa dadating na election kasi daw nandun yung pangalan niya, ipapamigay yung mga libro sa mga bata, may mga nanay na boboto, nandun yung pangalan niya, baka siya iboboto. Parang ganun, sir, yung exchange kanina. Pero eventually, nag-prevail nga si Senator Grace na, okay, ganito yan. Ano na lang po in general, yun naman ang book. So, yun.
So,
yun po kanina. Pero yun, hindi masyadong
Cecil,
mahaba, pero na-tense din kami.
Cecil, anong resolution? Tatanggalin yung pangalan niya sa libro o mananatili yung pangalan niya?
Hindi po yun na-resolve. Basta ang hiningi lang ni Senator Risa, ano yung laman ng libro. And that's it. So sabi, hindi pa nga gustong sagutin. Hindi niya directly sinagot. Buti, tinanong ni Senator Grace. So ano na lang po yung laman ng book. This is napaka-contrast dun sa previous 3 years na nagde-defend ng budget ang OVP na dati parang wala pang 5 minutes, pag-upo, approve agad. Pero ngayon medyo matagal. Although sabi nila, parang interparliamentary courtesy has also been extended to the Vice President po.
Pero in bringing up yung kwento ni VP na si Risa raw napunta ng Davao para humingi ng tulong sa kanya out of the blue, what was the intention there? Maghugot ng utang na loob?
Ibig ko ba sabihin?
Or may iba bang pinag-usapan related to Davao doon sa...
Ibig ko ba sabihin, Ed, non sequitur yung tanong?
Hindi ko sinasabi yun. Hindi ko talaga.
Tinatanong ko lang.
Putting words in my mouth.
Opo. Sir Ed, ang tanong mo yung intention. Si Bibi lang nakakaalam ng intention niya. But kami din nagulat na, bakit may hugot na naghingi ka ng tulong nung hindi ka pa nananalo for the third time ka na tumakbo. Tapos nagkasumbatan na. Parang ganun po yung dating din sa amin. Pero inulit niya after parang proceedings dun sa budget, nag-press con pa si BP at sinabi niya na, yun nga, bias yung mga nangyayari and then parang dinidestroy nga yung pangalan nila kasi nga pwede siyang tumakbo sa election sa 2028. But when we asked her, tatakbo ka ba? Sabi niya, mahirap magsabi kasi malay mo mahulog sa hagdan bukas, hindi pa matupad. So, dapat ang pagde-decide is by 2027. So, yun. Wala siyang sinabi kung tatakbo o hindi. Pero yun, ang sabi niya, nire-recognize niya na yung mga tao sa paligid niya ngayon ay conscious na pwede siyang tumakbo sa 2028 na hindi niya sinasabi whether tatakbo siya o hindi.
Kaya dapat hindi siya mahulog sa hagdan.
Sa libro. Ano nga yung laman ng libro? Para sa bata ba yun?
Hindi niya po dinetail yung yung content ng book but the title is Isang Kaibigan. So it's about friendship. Other than that, wala na po.
So ito may nakikita naming picture. Pang children siya eh.
Opo.
Children's writer ba siya?
Lawyer ma'am siya. Hindi ko po alam kung ano yung background pa niya. Other than yun, naging mayor siya. Ang ano nga daw niya, ang pangarap lang niya ay makumpleto niya yung 3 term as mayor, di ba? Pag under LGU, under the Constitution, 3 consecutive terms ka as mayor for 3 years. Yun lang daw yung pangarap niya. Hindi daw niya pinangarap na pero
anong sabi ni Senator Risa? Kasi I think maraming taong magsasabi na medyo valid naman yung takbo ng question na yon eh. Ano yung dahilan kung bakit naglabas ng libro? Related ba yan sa education programs ng Pilipinas Di ba? I mean,
Opo.
itutuloy pa ba yung questioning na yon ng mga senador?
Bali, ang I understand, yung budget of the OBP has been deemed submitted to the plenary.
So wala na.
So, baka po doon
Wala
na
na.
sa plenary i-discuss kung itatanong man ulit yon.
So kahit ibigay yung
Oo,
libro
kasi-
bukas, hindi na may tatanong yung ano, yung ano yung nilalaman at ano. Ako I'm also curious about this kasi if we are funding this book as the tax-paying
Yes.
public, does it
10 million daw
I think
po.
we have a right to know.
does it meet the standards required for publication
Oh.
of educational
And
literature
distribution.
and distribution? Kumbaga, di ba dapat
Distribution to children.
dapat may
And
may book board yun dapat that evaluates
Yeah, there's a book board.
each book that is to be given
There is
to
a book board and kapag yan hindi na-question, ha? Cecil, pag hindi yan na-question ng mga mambabatas natin, baka gawin ng lahat ng mga politiko dito.
magsusulat ng
At
libro.
gastos nating mga taong
And
taxpayer.
considering na hindi po maliit yung budget, 10 million ma'am daw yung would
exactly.
cover the book,
Exactly.
production, and distribution. And kanino nga i-distribute yun, di ba? Dapat parang may sanction ba ng government bago ka mag-distribute for free na
Yes.
pera natin po. Opo.
Kaya nga.
Pag
Kaya
pumasok-
nga tanong natin sa
it now
mga
becomes
senator
a public
siguro.
book, a publicly funded
Yeah.
education book.
Pag mapadpad ulit ako sa gobyerno, ma-appoint ulit ako, gagawa ko ng libro, ang title, Wag Po.
Ayun lang. Tayo dyan.
Bigyan mo po kami ng copy, sir.
Tapos mukha ni Manny Mugato yung
No. si Ronald.
Hindi kasi tingnan mo ha, kahit mga barangay captain baka gamitin yan na pangkampanya and all at the expense of people's money.
Kaya may rules dyan Ami.
Kapag hindi yan question.
Kaya may rules para dyan
Oh, you don't just publish a
may
book
rules dyan.
Hindi pwede.
for public schools.
Actually, children,
And unfortunately-
kailangan niyang bine-vet. Merong nagbe-vet niyan.
Lalo na kung nakalagay yung pangalan mo.
Especially nga, yun
hindi
nga.
na elaborate. Unfortunately, hindi na po na-elaborate yung about the book kasi nga parang nung sinagot niya yung title, parang hindi na nag-further question si Senator Risa. So, kumalma na and then eventually nag-manifest ng ibang senator that day. Ayun, parang wala na masyadong nagtanong about the budget. So, yun, later on, sinuspenda yung
And I
proceedings.
understand, bukas
yung
ibibigay yung
submitted na
kopya
po.
ng libro sa mga senator, pero tomorrow wala na yung
Oo.
Cecil, natanong ba si Vice President do sa statement niya na kaya siya nag-resign sa DepEd ay dahil dun sa budget ng DepEd?
Mismanaged.
Na mismanage
Wala
yung
pong
budget?
Hindi.
Ano, mahalaga yun,
Hindi
ha?
po masyadong nataxel yun. Kasi, yun nga, ang nag-focus lang dun sa initially yung tanungan nila ni Senator Risa, yung naging proceedings and eventually open na daw po yung short lang, mabilis lang din po. Hindi po kasi katagal kahapon sa DBM. Several hours yung discussion.
Okay. Ano po? Pakula natin si Cecil.
Yes.
Okay. Maraming salamat kay Doktora Cecilia Suerte Felipe.
Hindi po. Maraming salamat po. Maraming salamat po. Cecil
May
lang po.
doctorate
Thank
siya.
you. Good
talaga?
afternoon.
Thank you, Cecil.
Oh, may doctorate siya.
Talaga. Salamat, Cecil.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Hindi ka na namin ma-reach. May doctorate ka pala.
Hindi po. Ano po ako? Tauhan lang po ako ni Ma'am Aming.
Ayun
Sir
lang.
Ronaldo.
Cecil. Teka muna, Cecil, may bago ba dyan kay Alice Go? Senate?
Opo. Ang sabi ni Senator Risa, di ba umalis siya kahapon?
Oo.
Nag-reveal ni Senator Risa na nakaalis pala ng July 18. Initially pala nakita Indonesia and then Malaysia and then Singapore. Ngayon inaalam nila by the Senate Committee on Women and Children and Family Affairs are now parang setting up another hearing to discuss ano nangyari, bakit may nakatakas, samantalang wanted. And also, yung lawyer na nag-notarize nung document
A few days back.
ni Guo na bago siya umalis daw, papatawag kasi ang kiniklaim niya, nagpakita sa kanya si Guo. But when you check, nung nagpakita siya, sinabi nagpakita doon, 1 month na pala nakakaalis si Mayor. So, sino nagpakita sa kanya?
Baka
Or sabi
hologram.
ni Senator Sherwin, ano to? Labas-masok sa Pilipinas na hindi siya nakikita. So ang dami pong tanong pang lumalabas about itong sa case ni Mayor Guo.
At saka, Ami, for the first time, umamin ang Bureau of Immigration na parang tinatanggap na nila na
Baka
sa
may
labas
illegal
na
ano.
nga ng bansa. Naalala mo, kahapon, pinag-usapan pa natin yan. Wala pang
Yes.
sinasabi ang BI na ganun. No? Ngayon, yung head ng BI, kababalik lang niya, kahapon, galing sa isang conference ng mga Bureau of Immigration Head sa ASEAN at nasabihan siya na nandun na nga sa Malaysia. No? Dumaan na ron noong July 21. No? Yung si Alice Goo. Ibig sabihin, may pinanggalingan pa siya ng ibang bansa, baka Indonesia. Bago siya pumunta ng
Hindi,
Malaysia.
ang statement ngayon ng BI, nasa Indonesia daw siya.
Hindi,
Hanggang
nakaikot
ngayon.
na. Nakaikot na uli.
Dumaan
Hindi,
ng
ngayon daw. Ngayon
Malaysia,
daw.
Singapore.
Indonesia.
Ngayon daw
Last
nasa
is
Indonesia.
Ano nangyari? Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia uli.
Singapore.
Yes, bumalik sa Indonesia.
Bumalik siya sa Indonesia. So, nagbabakasyon lang, naglilibot lang siya sa ASEAN. No? Naglilibot lang. No?
Nag-issue ng statement kagabi kasi late na yung BI statement. Kinonfirm nga nila na nakalabas na daw. Pero at the time daw na nakalabas, wala pang hold order. Meron lang nung Immigration Lookout Bulletin na sinabi na nga natin, hindi siya pwedeng pigilan lumabas eh.
Pero ang sabi ng BI, Ami, wala silang record.
Kagabi.
Wala silang record na lumabas. Ibig sabihin, kahit may ang tawag dyan, anong tawag doon sa kwan?
Visa?
Hindi, yung hindi hold departure.
Immigration Lookout.
Yung
Immigration
lookout, kahit may
Lookout
lookout, ang sabi ng BI, hindi lumabas through official channels. Hindi siya lumabas. Kung lumabas siya,
Mukha nga daw through the southern backdoor, sabi
Yes.
ng
Yes.
Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission.
yes. Oo.
Yan naman ang sabi nila.
Pero
So yan
kaya,
ngayon ang kailangan alamin natin.
mahigit
Paano
sa buwan
nangyari?
na. Sabi ng abogado niya kahapon, di ba? Pangalan nun, ay ang alam niya, nandito pa dahil nakausap niya sa social media ba o Telegram, Facebook?
Sa social media
Internet.
website.
Nga,
At
sa internet lang daw.
at yung
Malaking tiwala sa immigration at malaking tiwala sa...
At malaki yung tiwala niya sa
abogado
ating
na
immigration na hindi pa nakakalabas at doon sa abogado na nag-notarize na siya ay habang siya ay nandito pa. So talagang gumagana
kasing
yung
pananalig eh.
gumagana yung ating sistema.
Oy, teka, si Cecil, pakawalan natin. Baka hindi makapag-cover yan. Magalit si Ami.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Cecil.
Thank you, Ma'am Ami. Thank you, Sir Ed. Thank you, Sir Ronald. Good
Thank you,
afternoon
Cecil.
po.
Thank you,
Okay.
Cecil.
Okay.
So at least umami na yung BI na nasa labas na nga ng bansa.
Pero pare-pareho lahat sinasabi na walang video ni Alice Go na dumating anywhere in those countries. Wala silang video footage ng arrival niya. So hanggang ngayon, medyo pinag-uusapan pa rin kung baka naman daw ibang tao, alam mo naman dito, mga tingin nila pare-pareho daw kapag Chinese, they all look the same sa ibang tao eh. Hindi nila sigurado kung yung Alice Go na may dala ng passport na yon, si Alice Go na kilala natin, the mayor. Sa baka daw merong mga nag-aano dyan na para mapahiya yung authorities natin, nasasabihin, ay nakaalis na yun pala, nandito, biglang susulpot dito sa Bamban. So ayan yung mga latest developments ngayon.
Pero Bok, do all the ports have facial recognition software? Baka mamaya naman
Hindi ko alam.
minamano-mano nila ng
Singapore yan eh.
pass forward.
Parang ang record sa Malaysia,
Hindi, parang footage lang. Parang footage lang.
parang Malaysia may record na pumasok na siya.
Kasi may ano naman yan eh, may flight number, may time yun, pwede mong kunin. Pwede mong i-pull out yung video, yung time na yun.
Ayan o,
Kung
Indonesia
dumating yan
to
dun sa
Kuala
airport na
Lumpur,
yan.
Kuala Lumpur to Singapore, Singapore
Yan
back
na nga.
to Indonesia.
Tsaka ayan may flight number yan eh. Kaya pwede mong hingin yon, immigration to immigration, pwede mong hingin yung footage nun, security issue to. At focus ka lang dyan sa arrival niyang mga flight na yan. Wala daw silang video ng arrival ni Alice Go.
Ako, I'm sure
May hawak ng passport ni Alice Go,
I'm sure Singapore at least meron. Dahil
Singapore, sigurado, Changi yan eh.
very tight ang security dyan.
Yes,
No?
even Kuala Lumpur, mahigpit yung
Kuala
airport sa
Lumpur,
Kuala
mahigpit din.
Lumpur.
Pero Bok, kung dumaan siya ng southern backdoor, bakit ang landing niya Denpasar, Indonesia, hindi Malaysia, hindi Sabah?
Hindi.
Ang layo ng Denpasar eh.
Bali yun.
Oo. Hindi.
Bali eh.
Oo, hindi. Pero
Papuntang Bali yun, no?
pwedeng may iba
Bali.
siyang inikutan from Mindanao. No? Pwede yon. Pwede ka namang pumunta to Mindanao from here na hindi i-check yung passport mo.
Hindi na talaga kaya.
Tapos for Mindanao, marami na rong mga yate na pwede kang dalhin kung saan mo gustong pumunta. Lalo na kung may budget ka.
Visa free tayo eh. ASEAN tayo eh.
Oo.
No visa tayo. Kaya okay lang. Madali yun eh.
Let's bring in our guest for today, Maritime Security Expert Ray Powell. Sir, good afternoon and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Powell.
Good afternoon,
Great to
Ray.
be here.
How are you?
How are you? Good.
Yes, sir. Sir, a lot of talk about what's been happening over there at Escoda or Sabina Shoal. But to most Filipinos, it's something very new. I mean, we've heard over and over again about Scarborough and Ayungin Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal, and now we're talking about Sabina Shoal. What is the importance of Sabina or Escoda Shoal, and why are the Philippines and China, having a big tussle over it?
And by the way,
Sure.
before I heard about it from the news, it was Ray Powell. I got it from Ray Powell first.
That's what I do. This has been coming for a while, I think. China has had vessels at Sabina Shoal intermittently for years. We've tracked them. They've mostly been passively asserting their sovereignty by parking maritime militia vessels there. We call it rafting, where they take them, they tie them all together, and they just sit there for months on end. And that's just China's way to assert their sovereignty very quietly and passively, and it's almost like a floating outpost. And so those have been there for quite a long time, and we've covered it at Sea Light over the years. What happened, I think, more recently was, of course, the Philippines went out and did a survey and believed that it found evidence of some preliminary island building kinds of activities at Sabina Shoal, with some dead coral being dumped, appearing to raise the level of the shoal. The Philippines was concerned that might lead to island building over time, and so they took the BRP's Teresa Magbanwa, a 97-meter Philippine Coast Guard ship, and they anchored in the middle of the shoal. To do two things, I think. One is to remind China that this is in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, and the Philippines didn't intend to simply allow China to lay claim to the shoal in this way, and also to kind of keep an eye on China to make sure that they weren't actually dumping coral and trying to do reclamation activities. So that happened in April, is when the Teresa Magbanwa showed up. And then over time, it became very clear that China was very agitated about this, and they would refer to the Teresa Magbanwa in similar terms as it talks about the BRP Sierra Madre out at Ayungin Shoal, right? They would talk about it as being like a quasi-grounding, and began to demand its removal. And then last week, we started to see these messages coming out of their propaganda outlets like the Global Times or their spokespeople, talking about the fact that they believed that the other 97-meter ship, the Motor Aquino, was going to go out and replace Teresa Magbanwa, and they started acting like they weren't going to allow it. They talked about taking resolute measures and other sort of words like that. And of course, the Motor Aquino has not gone out to Sabina Shoal. Instead, we had these two 44-meter vessels leave from Palawan on a patrol that did not obviously include Sabina Shoal. We'd have to ask the Philippine Coast Guard whether they intended to go to Sabina Shoal. But they went out and aggressively interdicted that patrol well south of Sabina Shoal, essentially on the high seas, of course, within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, interdicting their freedom of navigation, and clearly in the middle of the night had several collisions and trying to keep them from being able to go on their planned route.
But do you think China really is planning to reclaim and build an artificial island on Sabina?
I don't know. It's not clear to me. I think what is clear is that they have decided that Sabina belongs to China. They refer to it as territory, which it is not under international law. It's a low tide elevation, but they are now referring to it as territory, and which it does with other places that it wants to lay claim to. It just starts calling them territory. And China's sovereignty claims have always been very ambiguous. Sometimes they'll say, that all of the 9-dash line belongs to China, but then sometimes they'll say, well, we don't claim sovereignty over everything. It's just these specific places, but they've never been exact. They will talk about their name for Escoda Shoal or Sabina Shoal, and then they'll say, and relevant waters or adjacent waters, whatever that means to them at any given time. And so really, whatever they decide is theirs for when they decide it's theirs. And they'll talk about it as if it's always been theirs.
In correction, Ray.
Mr. Powell, have you monitored any activity of China that might be linked to the destruction of the corals in Sabina? Because the Philippine Coast Guard released some images, video, and photographs of the corals under the water that were already damaged.
Yeah,
Have you
unfortunately,
monitored anything that can be attributed to Chinese activities?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's really hard to monitor from afar. It's hard to see from satellites or from other things. So I really depend on the Philippine Coast Guard and people who can actually get out there to be able to say that. And obviously, the Philippine Coast Guard has been out there and has put out into the public that this has actually been quite destructive out at the Escoda Shoal. So again, I'd have to defer to the Philippine Coast Guard on that one.
And actually, the Coast Guard doesn't have the skill set for now to really study the coral reefs underneath. We need really a research team, an aquatic research team, to really do the study before we file the case. But I think this is a viable probability that if we are able to get scientific basis for the destruction of our coral reefs in Sabina, that could be the basis for another case in UNCLOS, which is, I think for now, the main proponent is Justice Carpio. Just for perspective, Sabina is 70 nautical miles away from Palawan. So it's not that far away. No, it's very near.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most concerning thing that we've seen. I mean, we've seen collisions before. We've seen blocking and swarming and all of these things before, but this is the closest we've seen it to the Philippine mainland. And so what we're actually really seeing, I think, is a moving of the battle lines. And I say battle in terms of this is a gray zone battle. It's a gray zone campaign by China to take over the West Philippine Sea. And the battle lines had been drawn before at Ayungin Shoal, and they have now moved closer to Palawan.
And to correct you, Ray, just a correction. According to the Global Times, we were the ones who rammed the Chinese Coast Guard vessel.
Well, as long as you've got high-quality news sources you're relying on there, Ronald, I defer to you.
But what's your assessment, personal assessment, Mr. Powell, of what happened? Because both sides are accusing each other of ramming the vessels of each other. What do you think happened?
I mean, so this is actually pretty typical of what we see from China. Is anytime they try to block Philippine movements and the Philippines tries to get around the ship and the ships collide, they blame the Philippines. But it's clear that China, I mean, just from looking at the pictures and sort of, what possible motivation would the Philippines have for going out and running into Chinese ships? And
we are so suicidal, Ray. We are so suicidal. That's why we rammed the much bigger, much stronger, more modern Chinese Coast Guard vessel. That's the reason.
Much bigger, much stronger.
Look at that.
Well, but this is actually very typical. It's what the term gaslighting is for, right? It's trying to make you doubt your reality. It's introducing this completely contrary and clearly false idea and trying to see if they can get you and others. And maybe it's not directed towards you and I. It's directed toward people who aren't sure, and of course directed to those who want to parrot China's line. And it says, well, clearly it's the Philippines that's causing all these problems, because if they didn't try to go out and assert their rights, there wouldn't be any problem.
And the other thing is that I understand Sabina or Escoda Shoal is is often a staging area for resupply missions by the Philippines to the Second Thomas Shoal area for the BRP Sierra Madre. So if they do take control of Sabina Shoal, then it makes it more difficult for the Philippines, I suppose, to do the supply.
Yeah, that's true. Now, of course, that's just sort of historically, that's what it's been. Now, how the Philippines will continue to do that in the future, I think, is still up in the air. I think one of the more interesting things as you think about this, though, is China has now really expanded the map of things that they are having to actively control. And controlling Ayungin Shoal is difficult. It takes a number of ships, but controlling Sabina Shoal is actually very hard. It's a much larger feature. It doesn't have just one entrance like Ayungin Shoal. And it's, of course, much closer to the Philippines, so they have to go further. It's farther away from their base at Mischief Reef. And, of course, unlike the BRP Sierra Madre, the Philippine ship at Sabina Shoal can move. And so,
and it's newer.
It's not as tactically for China is actually a harder problem. And so they've made themselves, by choosing this battle, they've made themselves a problem. They're going to have to defend this very, very large feature with many entrances and, again, if the Teresa Magbano wanted to move to a different part of the shoal, it could do that today.
And it's not that
In
Teresa
the
Magbano
meantime,
was...
Mr. Powell, what's the situation in Ayungin? Because that part of the West Philippine Sea is covered by an agreement between us and China. What's the situation right now as you have monitored?
So, China continues to aggressively patrol around Ayungin Shoal. The agreement held through one resupply. It held in part because both China and the Philippines were able to say contradictory things about what the agreement was, and nobody's ever seen the agreement. And I think that may be the best anybody can hope for right now, because I think both the Philippines and China just wanted this problem not to be. I think the Philippines obviously didn't want their troops to starve or dehydrate or have medical conditions. And actually, China didn't want that either, because that would be a very bad look for them. So I think in the end, they just sort of agreed to publicly disagree and let the resupply happen.
My question, Ray, is we have an agreement on Ayungin, specifically for resupply of BRP Sierra Madre. For now, it's holding. But we've only done one resupply mission.
It's holding, but we don't know what's in there.
We've done one resupply mission. But there is aggression in Scarborough and now in Sabina. So is this sustainable? Can you have a patch of stability in one place of the West Philippine Sea and major aggressions on other parts? Do you think this is sustainable?
I think what it demonstrates is that just because you come up with an agreement for one part of the West Philippine Sea, for maybe the most difficult, acute problem, China's not going to just stop, right? It's going to continue to advance. Its ambitions have never, ever changed. It intends to control all of its 9-dash line claim, which includes most of the West Philippine Sea. And it doesn't matter whether it advances and the Philippines is quiet or whether the Philippines is loud, China's ambitions are the same. So, people can say, well, before, when the Philippines didn't say anything and was quiet, we didn't have all these problems. Yes, but China was still advancing. So the only question is, does China advance against Philippine resistance, or does China advance quietly with no resistance?
But Ray, earlier you said that one of the reasons China negotiated and finally agreed to this agreement in Ayungin, specifically in resupplying BRP Sierra Madre, is that the transparency projects, the projects exposing the aggression of China, not only here in the Philippines, but to the world, was basically successful. That's why they were forced to negotiate. Can this also be true in the future for other parts of West Philippine Sea, or is it just a pipe dream?
Look, here's the thing about transparency. As I said, it's a tactic, it's not a strategy. So it is a thing that you do in order to do three things, right? One is to build your own national resilience, and I think it has unquestionably done that. Two is to build international support. Well, you just had the U.S. Secretary of Defense show up with $500 million for the Philippines. You've had a reciprocal access agreement with Japan. You've had the multi-sales. All of that is happening, right? And then, of course, you're trying to impose some kind of cost on China. And the costs are being imposed. China comes up with these agreements for a reason. They didn't want the thing at Ayungin Shoal to get out of control. But that part of the objective is turned out to be, this version of China is very, very difficult to deter. They are so confident and they are so intent and they are they've built up their claim to such an extent that in some ways they don't know how to stop. So, I think that the Transparency Initiative has done a lot. But of course, it has also carried a lot of risk, and all you have to do is see the pictures from the other night to understand how much risk. I mean, obviously, that's there are significant risks to. And by the way, let me say this because I was having this conversation with somebody just recently. Is there a braver, more? Is there a Coast Guard on planet Earth right now that you can think of that faces greater risks from day to day than the Philippine Coast Guard? I mean, they go out all the time on these missions of national importance with a mandate to carry out these patrols, knowing that they may be water cannoned, that they may face bladed weapons, that they may face ramming, and all of these kinds of things. What other Coast Guard has to put up with that?
Mm-hmm. But, sir, we've been talking extensively about an Ayungin agreement that nobody has ever seen, whose contents nobody even knows. Do you see any value in the Philippines laying bare the contents of this agreement? I know that there's an agreement between the two countries not to divulge the contents, which is strange to begin with.
Except China.
But at the same time, we've also seen that China claimed, had a different claim as to what were the contents of the agreement. In other words, they divulged what they claimed was an agreement. And we just reacted. The Philippines just reacted. So is there any value in us still sticking to that agreement that we should not expose or make public the contents?
So, this is one of these very strange. In some ways, I almost have sympathy for the people who came up with this idea, right? Because once again, there was sort of this box canyon that we flew into, which was where neither country had any trade space to back down, and yet there are human beings on the ship that need food and water, and they couldn't get it, right? And so something had to happen to get that through, but you didn't want that thing to be an agreement on the Philippine side to essentially surrender jurisdiction to China. And China had put itself in a position that it couldn't back down either. So weirdly, we almost are forced into this situation where both sides have to be able to claim the agreement says what they think it says and then live with the dissonance. I mean, at least the problem that we're facing today doesn't potentially involve the sickness and death of people on the ship, right? So it may just have been this thing got to a point where they couldn't resolve it in a way short of actually having people die, and so that's what they came up with.
Okay. I'll put the question another way. It's worked so far for Ayungin Shoal. You think it will work for Sabina if we work out a similar agreement?
So the agreement. So the thing about Sabina, Sabina is a different problem. At Ayungin Shoal, the problem, the BRP Sierra Madre is going to be there regardless, right? Unless somebody tows it off the shoal, it's going to be there, or unless the Philippines pulls its people off, it's going to be there. The Teresa Magbanwa could sail away tomorrow. It could sail to a different part of the shoal tomorrow. So it's a different tactical problem. It's not as hard a problem in a lot of ways. In fact, you can land a helicopter on the Teresa Magbanwa. It has a helipad. You can't do that at the Sierra Madre. So there are options available to the Philippines at Teresa Magbanwa that don't exist so I don't think we're at that point yet. with Sabina. We're certainly at a disturbing point, but I think that there are a lot of different options that I'm sure that the president and his National Security Council are thinking about right now.
Okay, maraming salamat. Thank you very much for joining us, Sea Light founder and
Thank you.
maritime security expert
Thank
Ray
you, Ray.
Powell. Thank you for joining us.
Great
this
to see
Thank
afternoon.
you,
guys.
Mr.
Take care.
Powell.
Okay, thanks for joining the Storycon today. Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Tito Ronald Llamas, our resident political pundit. Okay, just again tomorrow at 4 p.m. for the Storycon. I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.
This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.